Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 4 with the Total War mod. And of course, we are playing as Germany, as you probably know. And hello, Norwegian Patriot. Good to see you. Fuhrer? No, nah, I'm not the Fuhrer. But don't know if Germans would even use the word in the modern sense now. And it would definitely go over badly for non-German speakers. But yes, thank you so much. So we are here. Now, I know I rambled on about this on the notice about the possibility of a live stream. And I was advised, chat can give me your, or later you can give me your feedback to it. I was advised to put Joseph Goebbels here as a advisor. Because he has all of these bonuses. And I said, sure. And then, tending to look and see this. He has 25% reduction on all those costs, plus the 0.1 daily fascism support. Now, we're pretty good on what they are calling fascism, NSDAP, National Socialist German Workers' Party, to do it in the English. And of course, they're not fascist. They fooled the world into thinking they were fascist, including the fascists. Fascists thought the National Socialists were fascists. They weren't. So I've definitely been, and I know many of you have watched my Hearts of Iron 3 series, and I've gone into very much detail on this stuff. 5 or 10 years ago, I would have described National Socialism as fascism plus hyper-racism. No, it really isn't. They're both totalitarian viewpoints, but under the way Hitler was trying to practice National Socialism, there was a lot more economic freedom within Germany. And I say that because there was all kinds of import and export restrictions for Germany on various things. Part of that was just simply the lack of foreign currency. They didn't want to buy and import a lot of unnecessary stuff, depriving them of foreign currency, foreign exchange. So there was that kind of stuff. But Hitler, and this is, again, I'm talking about, because a lot of these guys are communists here, obviously. Ernst Thälmann isn't, but we're talking about the National Socialists here. There are different ideologies within it, and that's one thing that makes people confused, because you can find Hitler praising the church or Christianity at one point, and then at another point doing something very different. And I really think that was much more him trying to convince some groups of people, as opposed to him changing his mind. I think it really is more of a, telling one audience what they want to hear, and then a different audience what they want to hear, and then you hear in his sort of private talks that weren't for public consumption, generally speaking, having a different viewpoint. So people studying National Socialism can be confused, and often are putting their expectations on it. But I'm still studying it, and I know I'm wrong on some details just because I know I don't have everything right. But National Socialism under Hitler, he really wants to have a competing system within Germany. And I don't want to call it capitalist, because it isn't capitalist, but it is where fascism wants things highly regulated, highly controlled, highly sort of centralized, where Hitler wants different organizations, whether they be government organizations or whether they be private industry, to compete with each other. And again, I'm not going to use the C word, because it isn't in a C word way, but he wants that competition, and that is very different within. Hello, Blaze Delta, good to see you. And that is very different in an economic sense than how fascism, as I understand fascism, works within a internal economy. So there's not even economic. And the only time do you start to see such high levels of legal centralization of the economy in National Socialist Germany is only because of Speer and the war pressures. You know, the idea that if we don't all, you know, get along, as it were, between the different manufacturers, between different interests, if we don't all work together, we're going to lose this war. Now, of course, they're going to lose the war anyways. Proto-socialism, proto-capitalism, maybe, but it's not. They want Hitler, and you can see this between these two gentlemen right here. Both at one time or another were the foreign ministers of Germany, but at the same time, for a while, Konstantin von Neurath was the foreign minister of the German government, and Joachim von Ribbentrop, Joachim, however you want to pronounce it, von Ribbentrop, was the foreign minister for the NSDAP, for the party, at the same time. So they were both running parallel foreign policies that conflicted with each other. And Hitler was Neurath was the, you know, sort of government choice for the thing. And he was Ribbentrop was sort of auditioning for the role of foreign minister, as it were. And so he was running the foreign policy for the party, competing with each other. And this is what I'm talking about within Hitler's ideology as practiced in National Socialist Germany. You can see that later on with conflicts between Himmler and, do we have, no, I guess he's not here. Oh man, the Abwehr guy. Boy, I blank on these things. They call him normally dismal. Whatever. Come on, chat. Who's the head of the Abwehr in Germany? And yes, I know this. It's just I'm blanking on it. I know there's a delay for the chat. Yeah, it was sort of anti-Hitler. Boy, I'm gonna get stuck on this. And then you have Walter Schellenberg, I think, would be the head of the head of the Wehrmacht. No, the Abwehr intelligence military. Canaris, that's it. Wilhelm Canaris. See, I do know this. So Canaris with sort of the Abwehr's military, but he was also sort of running generally, shall we say, foreign intelligence for Germany. But Walter Schellenberg under Himmler was running foreign intelligence for the SS. And so that they were often competing with each other, including not only are they spying on each other, they're also, say the Abwehr has an agent in a foreign country that's doing something, and the SS doesn't know about it. So they're spying on this guy, thinking, well, no, the Gestapo is internal to Germany. Gestapo doesn't. The Ausland SD, I think, is the Ausland SD. Walter Schellenberg, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I've doing this. And so so the Ausland element of the SS, the overseas, would be following or tailing somebody that they think is a danger, but is really an agent of the Abwehr. because they weren't talking to each other. So this is something that really shows that National Socialism is not fascism. They're both revolutionary ideas. And I'm still struggling with whether National Socialism and fascism are right-wing or left-wing. Now, of course, if you were to listen to most fascists, most socialists and communists, they're going to call them right-wing because they are hierarchical in their ideology. They are ultra-nationalistic in their ideologies. They both have private property as a fundamental element of their ideologies, although both, private property is stronger under National Socialism unless it's actually going to hurt the state, or the state is sort of an expression of the people's will under Hitler's belief. So the state and the people are sort of one, as he sees it. Where in Mussolini's realm, private property ownership would have to benefit the state, if you see the difference. A business can sort of do what it wants to under National Socialist Germany, so long as it is not seen as damaging to the state. But under Mussolini's fascism, private property, and particularly like a big thing like a car factory or a large farming setup or something like that, would have to be directed by the state to do what the state thinks is best for it. And I think this comes down to some of the ideological differences, is that Hitler thinks that what a car manufacturing might be doing, he's not sure whether it's benefiting the state or not. So he's going to let it run and do its thing, and then figure out, well, is this a good thing for the government or not? And if it turns out to not be a good thing for the government, they'll tweak the situation. They'll adjust what's happening. But so they'll let it try, unless it's clear under the things that it's doing something that he sees as bad, like as Hitler would be seeing something that promotes Jewishness, whatever that is, because Paris fashion was Jewish fashion, but German fascism, or fashion shouldn't follow Paris traits. They should do their own German traits. So there's this whole, and I've been sort of trying to dig into this, there's this whole modernist, not trying to do the old kitsch clothing of the past, but trying to do a modern fashion for men and women, but isn't Jewish influence. And this is the nuttiness that they're getting into. Just because a designer is Moscow, I presume that's what you're saying. Oh, what's capital? Yeah, Moscow. Okay. But so so it's just like the idea that Paris fashion was seen by the National Socialists as influenced by Jewishness. They should do something different, modern but different. And so, cool, great to have you back, Toy Jet. So so if it's not clearly seen under the National Socialist ideology to be harming Germany, they're going to let them do what they want. Where under Mussolini's fascism, a major thing will be directed to say, oh, well, you're going to make this type of car, and it's going to be a cheap car for the masses, or an elite car for a sports car or something for the elites, or whatever it may be. You're going to be directed by the state to do it. And so the socialists are going to see the nationalism, the private property, the hierarchical natures of their societies as right-wing. But both National Socialism and fascism are both revolutionary ideologies. They are not conservative ideologies. And so they are very, and they sort of fool people. Both of them do. National Socialism more fools the conservatives in Germany, the nationalists, under Hindenburg and others, von Papen and others, that you can work with these National Socialists and they are the the better alternative to the communists. They weren't. I know I didn't actually start to plan to do a political talk on all of this, but so I don't really know whether we're looking at left-wing revolutionaryism and right-wing revolutionaryism, or whether we're looking at two versions of left-wing revolutionaryism. I don't know really, because there's a lot of socialistic, because Benito Mussolini's parents were socialists. He edited a major socialist newspaper or magazine or something, or maybe both, in Italy, and he was a diehard socialist, and it's only sort of partially through heavily through World War One, coming to the realization of nationalism and pure collectivism of, without a self-interest in the collectivism is not a good thing. So Mussolini is still a leftist in many ways. So I'm still sort of struggling whether it's right or left. But fascism and National Socialism are very much different ideologies. Oh, and Japan's ideology is not fascism either. It is also, but it is hyper-nationalistic. It is, it doesn't have the socialist element in Japan. It is a totalitarian system. It is a militaristic system, but it does not have the socialist element of even a protest. Yes, Mussolini did. You're absolutely right. So that's what I'm saying is Mussolini. He's named Benito after Benito Juarez, the president of Mexico, the fairly leftist. I don't know if Benito Juarez was a socialist per se, but he was definitely a reformer in Mexico. I really, quite honestly, don't know his ideology. I know he was a reformer, well respected, very much liked Benito Juarez, very much liked Abraham Lincoln, and sort of modeled himself on Abraham Lincoln, who is very much not a socialist, the first Republican president. And the Republican Party is founded as the anti-slavery party in America. That was its founding viewpoint, of a freedom party, of a anti-collectivist, anti-paternalistic party is what the Republicans were founded. So I don't quite honestly know. I'm not saying he was or wasn't a socialist in viewpoints, but he was, Benito Juarez was definitely a reformer, land reform, which might be seen, because, for various reasons, might be seen as a communist kind of thing. But I think he was much more of the idea of having the peasants owning the land, as opposed to having the state own the land and the peasants work it for their own benefit through the state. No, Franco was a nationalist. The Phalangists were a fascistic party, sort of fascism light, and they were a member of the faction under Franco's nationalistic government. So they were a coalition member within the nationalist government. I call nationalism pragmatism of the right, so that they would be willing to take some fascist elements within their government or within society, but they're not ideologically fascist. They're willing to take conservative elements, shall we say, the church owning lots of land, or the church controlling certain levels of education within the government, but they needn't be a strongly pro-clerical, pro-theocracy. You know, they could support religious freedom within, say, Spain, if we're talking about Francisco Franco and Spain. So he can be, and I don't specifically know, and I don't know of any anti-freedom of religion in Spain under Franco. Definitely he supports the Catholic Church, but I don't know of people being jailed just because they were atheists or something. There were a lot of people jailed, but I think, and they may have been atheists, but I think they were jailed for suspicions of revolutionary activity and not because of specifically because of their religion. So nationalism is pragmatism of the right, and that's what I see Franco. Japan, they have functionally no social welfare elements or collectivization for the good of the people that we would sort of see in the ideology of fascism. So this label of fascism that gets dumped on the Axis during World War II, I think, is a propagandistic label, heavily, and I see it mostly from through American viewpoint, mostly because if it was a war against totalitarianism, oops, one of the biggest, strongest allies in the war is totalitarian Russia, if you will, or the Soviet Union. Just going to read the chat. Good morning, Absolute King. Yeah, Norway. No, I would not say so about acting like an absolute king. Hello, Cat Amboat. Aimboat. I'm sorry, I'm missing all of the Norwegian, I presume it is. Oh, the ads, yeah. Yeah, well, Twitch needs to make its money somehow. So, you have, and so since one of your major allies is a totalitarian state, and I don't think anybody would dispute that, they start labeling what they're against as fascism. And if you look at Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the President of the United States, you'll find praise for fascism and Mussolini prior to, oh, I don't know, 1935 or 1936 or something like that. And you only start seeing, some anti-fascist rhetoric creep into it, because you can look at what is it, one Rockefeller Plaza, One Rock is, I guess, or whatever the TV show is named after the building. That building is an homage to fascism, literally. You'll look at all the murals up on the building. You look at the statuary up on the building. It is all a hooray for Mussolini. That whole building is a temple to Mussolini and fascism, done by that. Well, yeah, patriotic Brit. They did call them the fascist, absolutely. But I'm talking about what I'm seeing in the West propaganda at the time. And so I don't know how much they're calling it. And it definitely, I would say, goes back to the left's, because if you want to say the Soviets called the Germans fascist, well, you can look at, and again, I may have this wrong because I don't really read Russian. I've known Russian speakers, so I may or understand Russian well, so I may have it wrong. But my understanding is the propaganda coming out of the Soviet Union, say in the 1980s, talking about the West German government or the NATO countries, they were calling them fascists. Okay, at that point, this is under Brezhnev or whoever or Andropov or Gorbachev early on, they were calling the West fascists then. So to them, and this goes back to earlier, to before, to the rise of fascism, to the rise of National Socialism, and in these other countries, you have the left categorizing, smearing, if you will, anybody that's opposed to them, fascist. And we see that today. Now, you can say somebody is fascistic, or a state is being fascist in sort of the broad sense, state control. I would very much put that in California right now, because they are banning things like, flimsy little plastic bags, very flimsy little plastic bags. They've banned them in the state of California for the store handing them out, when you buy groceries or something. They've literally banned them. And as one of my relatives said, who works for Caltrans, well, you don't know how much you see these things just flying and getting collected in the garbage, because they're so light and so thin, they're just garbage. So yeah, okay, fine. If you want to determine that plastic bags, these light, flimsy ones, are a biohazard, a hazard to the environment. Okay, fine. But then they have mandated the sale of paper bags, meaning you can't give paper bags, biodegradable paper bags, away for free in the stores. You must sell them. You can't give them away. You must sell them. Oh, and you can sell big, heavy plastic bags, sort of designed to be reusable. You can sell those, but you can't give those away. So that is fascistic, in that it is government control of individuals' activities. They are banning the giving away of something in a store, while it's legal to sell the same thing. That is fascistic. But that doesn't mean that Californian government is a fascist state in the classical sort of sense. Sorry, I want to read some of this. Okay, the Nazis. I always praise the Nazis the years before the war, because yes, well, I wouldn't say all. People like Churchill were railing against them very, very early on. Yes, Antifa is practicing a sort of fascist type practices. Yes, and I remember that Patriotic Brit. You had to pay way back when I was living there, which I thought was abhorrent, but I like freedom. Okay, cat. How interesting. Yeah, and so what I'm objecting to is well, I don't see the plastic bags as being such an environmental waste hazard for whatever, that they should be banned. But even if you do agree, whether as a society, whether you have, like the Netherlands or Norway, if you have a coherent agreement on something culturally, okay, I can respect that. Whether I agree with it or disagree with it, I can respect it and think that it's a reasonable thing. But then to have it like, oh, well, but you can, sell them a bag. Well, why can't I give the bag away? If it's something that you are accepting to happen, and then you're saying you must, and mandate the minimum sale price. They're not just saying you have to sell them. They're not saying, they're mandating the price of the sale of the bags if they're to be sold. So that is where you have a fascistic actions. So if you look at on the right, you have, I'm calling it the right. No, yeah, I guess. When you have a revolutionary right-wing party, and if that, I don't know if that's the right, because you can have, oh, I don't know. Can revolutions be of the right? And I'm not talking about revolts. A revolution, and again, and this is going to be end up being a special episode here, and we'll get to, and I'll label it as such in the description. And we will get to playing people if and listen to the moderators. People, thank you. When you have the difference between a revolt and a revolution. A revolt is an overthrowing of the government. A revolution is also overthrowing a government. But a revolt could be kicking one king off and putting a different king on the throne, let's say. A revolution is and as in the term, is a revolving. Is those that were on the bottom are now on the top, if you will. Is a I want to use revolt again, but is a tearing down of the old system to put in a new system. Generally speaking, and when you see used, I think incorrectly for America, the American Revolution. I agree with the English in calling it the American War for Independence. AWI, sort of their shortened thing for it, because I do see that as a war of independence. And you look at sort of the British Glorious Revolution, in which you get rid of King James and you put in King William. I think that is also not a revolution either, where you really get, at least in the Western world, the first real significant revolution is the French Revolution, and I think that is accurately named there as the French Revolution, is because not only were they getting rid of a corrupt, bad, ineffective government to put on a more effective one, and it's not just removing one, say, the North French are kicked out from ruling and the South French are now ruling or something like that, a different faction within society, and just changing factions. You're changing, you're trying to eliminate by murder all of the nobles, just because they're the nobles. Whether you're calling any activity simply by being a noble, owning land, whatnot, as being a crime, when it wasn't a crime before, so they were doing something lawful and normal. Whether they were doing it well or badly or justly or unjustly, that's a different thing, as opposed to saying, oh, well, that noble killed that peasant and he was not punished for it because he was too powerful in the old system. Well, then, okay, then you have a trial, which there, of course, were kangaroo trials going on during the French Revolution. But you can have a trial, after a revolution and go, yeah, that guy killed that peasant 10 years ago, and here's our evidence. Whether it's all good in a modern sense or not evidence, but it's evidence, and okay, then you kill that noble for that particular crime, or some other thing like that. That would be a reasonable thing, but the French Revolution was not. And so I'm still struggling with the language and forming. Let's see what Patriot. Yes, you're right, the grand and dramatic, but you also have the, shall we say, within the Glorious Revolution, you have the, if you will, triumph of Lockeism, John Locke, within that whole viewpoint, as opposed to the older order with, shall we say, organic state, as opposed to the contract state theories of government that Locke and also Hobbes, though that when Locke is bright in that man is generally just and good. Hobbes is dark in that man is generally bad and greedy and needs to be controlled. Hobbes wants to have a positive society, but he thinks you need to do it by government control of the bad nature of man generally. Is sort of the two competing viewpoints of contract theory of government that are all being founded right around the time leading up to the Glorious Revolution, or as I would call it, the Inglorious Revolution. And there was, back in 1988, long time ago, even before some of you were born, there was a British Army Museum exhibit, the British Army Museum there in London, called it the Glorious Revolution ? And it was a whole big exhibit set up for about a year, like taking over a floor of it, which I went to. I made sure I went to that, and it was the army, the state, questioning its own revolution. So I thought that was very, very interesting, and it's something that wouldn't have been able to happen definitely before World War II. The army could not have put out something that basically says the current British government is illegitimate, because that's what they were saying by their questioning mark. Is the current British king and queen and whatnot a legitimate form of government for Britain? And I don't know if that went over. Well, I'm sure it didn't go over everybody's heads, but the army was questioning the Glorious Revolution. And if you looked at some of their stuff, that they were pamphlets and things that they sold, they were very much questioning that whole revolt. I'm setting up the Williamite government, which I thought, again, was very, very interesting on multiple levels. So, I don't know, do you guys have any other questions? Probably not, because I've talked on long enough, and this is going to be the end of this episode of talk of, is fascism and Nazism right-wing or left-wing? I think is going to be the title of this talk here, sort of a podcast, if you will. And to sort of also to look at the difference of, in Austria, which Austria is a very interesting case, and I know those of you who have, and I know I'm dragging this on here, but those of you who have watched my channels for a long time, I like comparative states within the same culture, North and South Korea kind of things, East and West Germany, and how things are handled differently within, shall we say, the same. Oh God, no! I hate King William. Bastard that he was. Should have been shot, hung, drawn, quartered. Oh God. You can ask other questions. Complete and total bastard. But there you go. Not as big a bastard as the guy who should rot in hell, Cromwell, but who I'm sure is rotting in hell. Cromwell is. But Austria, you can see there, the sort of two main political conflicts in Austria were between National Socialists and the Fatherland Party, which were fascist. The government of Austria at this time, hey, thanks for following the channel. If anybody else would like to, I would appreciate doing that. Thank you. The Fatherland Front was the current, in November 37th, was the current government of Austria, and it was a fascist government. Didn't have complete and total control over the government. This is one thing you also have to, when looking at whether it's Mussolini's government or other fascist governments, they are often the party in power, but they have not gotten to a dictatorship that they had full control over, meaning that there is still legitimate opposition within the country. And so the conflict here was between the National Socialists, which had been outlawed after the National Socialist assassinates the Prime Minister of Austria, who was a fascist. So there we see German fascism under the Fatherland Front versus German National Socialism under the NSDAP in Austria. Okay, so we're going to end this episode here. thanks for watching. Thanks for liking it if you would. And if you're gonna dislike it, tell me why. I mean, you can hit that dislike button. I do, I think that's cool. But tell me why. And cool if it's just say political talk and you weren't here for that. I do understand that. And so next episode in this series will be gameplay. See you then.